Hi, I'm Josh Duty, a salary negotiation coach for high earners, and today I'm going to be talking about physician contract negotiation. This is meant to be a high-level overview of things that you should consider and think about when you are looking at a contract, deciding whether to accept it or to negotiate it. And to be honest with you, my main goal for this presentation is so that when you do have a contract in hand sometime down the road, that there's a little voice in the back of your head that says, wasn't there a guy who I saw a video and he said that you could negotiate these contracts? There is going to be some tactical, high-level information here on how to negotiate physician contracts, and I'm going to cover that now, but this is not going to get into super low-level detail that would be dependent on, for example, what kind of group or hospital that you're joining and that kind of thing. It'll be very high-level things that pretty much any physician should consider when negotiating contract. Okay, so there are three things that we're going to talk about today very quickly. Your negotiation starts early, that you should negotiate your contract, and then a few things to think about before you start negotiating. Negotiation starts early, and I mean really early, as in it can begin at the very beginning of your conversation with the particular place that you might be going to work, whether that's a hospital or a private group or any other institution that might be hiring you as a physician. And what I mean by that is pretty early on, sometimes they'll ask you what you're hoping to make if you come to work for their team. And this can be sort of a subtle salary negotiation thing that happens early in the process that you may not even perceive to be a salary negotiation tactic, but indeed it is. They're trying to kind of set the bar. They're trying to figure out where you should be. And what's really interesting about this question is, especially for, for example, a resident who's finishing their residency and they're about to get their first attending job, the difference in pay from residency to attending is sometimes many multiples of the residency pay as an attending. And so even, two multiples instead of three can feel like a really big jump, but maybe there were three multiples available. And you don't want to accidentally kind of box yourself into a lower compensation level. So when they ask you what you are hoping to make if you go work for them, this is sort of a canned response that I like to give to my clients and that I write about a lot. And that is that I don't really have a number in mind. I know that I'll be a valuable addition to this team, and I look forward to hearing what you suggest when we get to that stage. So in other words, I'm not going to give you a number. I look forward to hearing what number you say when we get further down the road. And this way, hopefully what you do is you avoid talking about numbers so that you can get a better sense of what their budget might be and a bunch of other information that can be really helpful to you. So don't share your salary expectations before you start working or negotiating with anybody who's offering you a full-time contract. To elaborate on this a little bit, the main reasons that it isn't in your best interest to share your salary expectations is that you really know very little about them, especially if you're in a situation where you're sending out applications to many, possibly dozens of institutions, hoping to get some offers. There's no way that you can do the amount of research necessary to understand what their budget is, how many physicians they're hiring, how badly they need to hire somebody with your specialty, and all those other things. And so I like to reframe that question of, what are you hoping to make if you come work for us, as something more like, hey, you don't know anything about our budget or how badly we need to hire someone, but why don't you take a wild guess what we might pay somebody with your specialty and your background to do this job that we're hiring for. And the truth is that you really can't even make an educated guess. You might be able to ballpark it, but there are so many factors, especially with physician contracts, that can cause that number to be much higher or much lower, that you really are just guessing. If you guess too low, you could cost yourself a lot of money. They'll say, oh, that's great. We can give you this contract and it looks good to you based on what you said, but maybe far lower than what they would have paid had you pressed. Or you could guess way too high and they might think, I'm not sure it's worth considering to talk to this person. They seem to be out of our range in terms of budget. Maybe we'll just move on to the next candidate. So it's better for you to give the scripted answer that I mentioned before and just say, I don't really have a number in mind. I look forward to hearing what you suggest when we get to that stage, so that you can defer that conversation, so that you can continue having interviews, continue to impress them, and hopefully eventually elicit an offer from them that you can then review and say, okay, now I know about where they are in terms of their comp ability, their budget, and the other factors too. That's another issue with physician contracts is they're so detailed. There are so many factors in those contracts that could determine whether it's a good role for you or not. Some of them are not even comp related. And so it really helps if you have a chance to see what is in their contract before you start talking numbers, so that you can then gauge how much money it's going to take them to pay you to be okay with the other terms in the contract. So here's the next thing, which is that you should negotiate your contract. And I know this may sound a little bit weird given that I'm a salary negotiation coach and this is what I do. Obviously, I wouldn't be talking to you if this wasn't something that I recommended for you. But this is something that I know a lot of people have heard, that you can't negotiate physician contracts, or that they're really restrictive with this kind of thing. And so people are, especially like I said, a resident moving to an attending job, can be dissuaded from negotiating because they think, it's not really going to be worth it. These contracts are one size fits all. So let's talk about some reasons that you should negotiate here. One is that there may be more money available to you than you are aware of, or that you even might think. And so the opportunity to negotiate is one that you only get occasionally, especially if you might be in this role for a long time. You could move into an attending role, and then now you're stuck there for 5 years at a lower comp than you should have been. And you may find that out, probably will find that out over time, that, gosh, if I had negotiated this, I could have done a lot better. Also, there are other things in the contract that you might negotiate that could really improve your quality of life. So aside from compensation, shift schedules and things like that can be negotiated, and you might have a much more pleasant time working for this institution if you negotiate some of those things to align better with your personal preferences before you actually sign the contract. So I definitely encourage you to negotiate. As you'll see, there are a number of different areas that you can negotiate. But the first thing I want to say is that it's a myth that physician contracts are not negotiable. They are definitely negotiable. I have helped people negotiate them. I have lots of stories from people who have negotiated them, sometimes in very creative ways, but always in ways that make the physician feel better about the contract that they're signing and about the job that they're taking on, which is a very difficult job that can be very draining. And at least they're being compensated, working a schedule that they feel good about, and some other things that improve that contract before they accept it. There aren't any standard contracts. I want to reiterate this. So not only is this true sort of from institution to institution, but even within institutions, there isn't a boilerplate one-size-fits-all contract most of the time. They may present it as such, and you may be told that by different people that you know who are possibly other physicians. But the truth is there are no standard contracts. There's a lot of variety. I've seen a lot of physician contracts. They can be very, very different, person to person, specialty to specialty, institution to institution. And so understand that not only is your contract probably a little bit different than a colleague who might be very similar to you, but they're probably a lot different than other institutions might be offering. And what that means is that there are usually more opportunities to negotiate than you might perceive. So let's get into some tactical, kind of how do you approach this contract negotiation when you decide to do it. The first thing is that you want to identify what is potentially negotiable. And what I mean by that is you'll see things that are in contracts that look like maybe they're negotiable. Like I mentioned, shift schedule earlier. So are you working 12s or 8s? Are you working nights, weekends? Which location are you working at? That kind of thing. That stuff may not seem to be negotiable, but it very well could be. Also, of course, there's your base salary. If you have incentive-based comp, how that works might be negotiable. And there could be things like stipends available. And so what you want to do is just kind of review the contract and maybe even use a highlighter or just take a note that says, is this negotiable ? And you can just kind of go through those things and start to identify things that might be negotiable. The tell for a lot of these things is a quantity of some kind. So like I said, 12s or 8s, how many shifts per month, nights or weekends, how many of those are you working? Those things often are negotiable, but there can also be other things that are not quantities per se, but that look like quality of life improvements that could be negotiable as well. So the idea is just look for things that you think, I wonder if that's negotiable. And you want to just list those things out. That's the first step to negotiating your contract, is identifying what you think might potentially be negotiable. So here are some things, some examples of things that might be negotiable. Obviously, the salary and other types of comp. If there's a bonus, there could be a sign-on bonus for joining early, especially if you're moving from residency to an attending role. They can often say, hey, listen, if you'll sign early with us, 6, 7, 8 months out sometimes, maybe we'll give you a sign-on bonus. And if they don't mention that, but you're talking to them pretty early in the cycle, then maybe that's something that you could float out there. The number of shifts, I mentioned that before. When those shifts are happening, nights, weekends, days, whatever that is. Maybe there's a certain time of day that you prefer, or you want to try to avoid Fridays for different reasons. And so when you're working those shifts can be negotiable sometimes. Where you're where you're working, which shift location you're at. Maybe your commute is a little bit better to one location, and so you can try to angle for more shifts at that location, or maybe no shifts at the location that's further away from you. So the first thing that you want to do is identify things that are potentially negotiable. There could be a lot more things. Again, physician contracts vary a lot from institution to institution. And so you just want to go through your contract and just kind of look for things that you think, I wonder if that's negotiable. List them. And then the next step is to prioritize the potentially negotiable list. So when you're negotiating your contract, you will have an opportunity to kind of fine tune it, but you want to pick the most valuable things to you first. So you want to say, okay, well, there are 6 things in this contract that I think might be negotiable. This is number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3 in terms of most valuable thing to use to negotiate. And again, this could be compensation based, or you could look at the compensation numbers and say, these are great, but there's some other things in here that don't feel very good to me. A non-compete, immunity, if you have that kind of a thing in the area that you're going to from malpractice and that kind of thing. So you just want to look for different qualitative and quantitative things that could be really valuable to you and prioritize them to say, this is the most valuable, this is the second most valuable. And now you have kind of your list of things to negotiate organized in a way that you can prioritize them to focus your negotiation on the things that matter the most to you to begin with. And then you're going to negotiate one thing at a time. So this is really important. A lot of folks will come to me. Sometimes they've already kind of begun negotiating. They feel uncomfortable about it. Maybe they feel like they made some missteps. And they say, I'm going to reach out to Josh and see if he can help me out here. And a lot of times the missteps they've made are using what I call the kitchen sink strategy. So they list, maybe those 6 or 7 things that they would like to have. Maybe they add a few more for good measure. And then when they counteroffer, instead of saying, hey, you offered $250,000 base salary, I'd like to be at 280. What they say is, you offered this base salary. I don't see a sign-on bonus. I'd like to change my shift schedule. I wonder if you can add this thing. I want to do that thing. And they add 6 or 7 or 8 things to their list. And what they're thinking is, well, at least this way I'm going to get something out of this negotiation. If I ask for one thing and they say no, then I'm stuck. And so they ask for 6, 7, or 8 things. The problem is, in the same way that you prioritize the things that are most valuable to you when you look through the contract and you said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 most valuable things to me that I see, the institution that you're going to is going to make a similar list, but it's going to be what's the most expensive stuff for us to give this candidate before we sign this contract with them. And it's probably going to look a lot like your list, but upside down. And so if you started with base salary and then maybe a sign-on bonus and then RVUs and then your schedule, they might say, let's see, the most costly thing that we can give them is cash. So we don't want to do that. The cheapest thing we can give them is an agreement to work shifts at a different location. Same number of shifts, same hours, all that good stuff. We'll just put them in a different location, no problem for us. And so you don't want to give them that option because they're just going to choose the cheapest things for them to give you, and they'll give them to you. And then you're kind of stuck because you said, here are 7 or 8 things that I would like to negotiate. They give you 2 or 3 of them that turn out to be the least valuable things to you. And now they've been a good negotiating partner. They've given you something that you asked for. And in return, you should sign the contract is sort of the feeling that you'll get. Instead, what you want to do is focus on one thing at a time. This is the thing that's most important to me. I'm going to ask for more of that thing. See if they're flexible on that thing. Maybe they give it to you. Make sure that if you're asking for something and they give you a yes, then you're okay ending the negotiation. So you want to make sure that the amount of the thing that you're asking for, or the quality of the thing that you're asking for, that if you get a solid yes from them, an outright yes, that you're going to be willing to accept it. So once you are actually negotiating, what do you ask for? So I'm going to use salary here as an example. I mentioned 250K is an offer before, so I'll just go with that. Typically, if it's a quantity, you want to ask for 10 to 20% more or some kind of equivalent there. This can definitely vary a lot. This is a very broad rule of thumb, but certainly for things like compensation and other sort of comp-related numbers, then 10 to 20% more or less, if you're trying to negotiate down, for example, in number of shifts or hours or that kind of thing, is the way to go. So if they offer you 250, then you would counter somewhere between 275, which is 10% up, or 300,000, which is 20% up. In the example I mentioned earlier, I said 250 to 280. So that's, in that sweet spot there. So you want to ask for quantities to be 10 to 20% more. And of course, there are going to be a lot of things that aren't quantities necessarily, that might even be binary, yes or no. And of course, you will have prioritized those appropriately. So in general, when you're asking for things on your list of priorities that you have set out, you want to ask for 10 to 20% more on things that are quantifiable. The last thing I'll say here is that your yes is valuable. So I mentioned earlier that you should negotiate. A reason to negotiate is they might be flexible in getting you to join. But I think it's important to kind of step back and understand the amount of work that has gone in to the process to get to a point where they are offering you a contract as a physician. It's a very arduous process. You have experienced this with all the interviews that you have to go through and all the other work you have to do to get to that offer stage. And similarly, they are investing a lot of resources in finding the right candidate, winnowing down the candidates that they have into the candidate or candidates that they want to offer to. And so you saying yes is a big win for them, because that means they don't have to continue interviewing for this role that you're going to fill for them. And so a lot of people will ask, do I need leverage? Do I have to have multiple offers in hand before I can negotiate and other forms of leverage? And the answer is not necessarily, and that's because your yes itself is valuable. It has already cost them a lot of money to get to this stage. It's extremely valuable for you to say yes so they can check that box next to a physician in this role or specialty that they've been trying to fill for maybe months. And you can give them that yes by first, hopefully getting some concession from them in terms of the contract negotiation. So I want to say that your leverage is important here, and the leverage that you have is the word yes. And by saying yes, you can help them to save a lot of money and time and anxiety, and bring a physician on board that they're really interested in bringing on board. And so to get to that yes, you just put them through a little negotiation first. A couple of things to think about before you negotiate. So now we're kind of zooming back in time. I mentioned all of your interviews before. Let me give you some ideas on how you can excel in those interviews. So the main thing that I like to push for is that my clients use a tactic called positioning. Positioning is really a sales and marketing kind of concept that I've adapted to interviews. The reason that I recommend positioning is that there are lots and lots of interview techniques. You have probably learned some of them in med school or during your residency, and they can be very effective, but they can also be sort of complicated. And so I realized that anytime that I was coaching someone through interview prep or doing mock interviews with them, that I would always lean towards this idea of positioning. Positioning is really a simple concept that is just you describing how you're going to help them based on your background, your skill set, what you bring to the table, and specifically how you're going to help them. And so hopefully throughout your interviews, you've had an opportunity to identify what it is that they need, why they're hiring a physician. If you again zoom out, they're investing a lot of time and money and resources in bringing somebody on. And the question is why? What are they filling this role for? So let me give you some ideas that you can use to help you prepare for your interviews, to be as effective as possible, to stand out from other similarly qualified candidates that they might be considering. So the first thing, and again, this is going to be very simple, is to identify their goals. So there's a reason that they posted this opening. There's a reason that they're talking to you, and that's because they're trying to accomplish something. So what are they trying to accomplish? And this can be very macro, as an institution, as a hospital. What are they trying to do? Or it could be micro, which is, in this specialty or subspecialty, what is this director of that group trying to do? Why are they bringing somebody else in? Are they unable to perform all of the surgeries that are available to them, and so they're losing business to other hospitals or other surgery centers? Or did they have somebody leave who was a crucial part of the team and they're trying to kind of backfill that role? Figuring that out can really help you to understand what they're trying to accomplish, specifically by opening this role, interviewing you for it, going through all of that process, and eventually making you a job offer. So identifying the roles of the institution, the team, the specific manager or director that you'll be working under can be very valuable. You also want to identify what challenges they might be facing. So a lot of the time, the people that you're talking to will have specific things that are difficult for them right now, as for example, a director, or even as a hospital or something like that. And you want to identify, what are those challenges that they're facing? Again, maybe they have a challenge of they're just unable to perform the number of surgeries that are available to them, and so business is going elsewhere. That's a challenge for them. It means that they're understaffed. It means that they're losing out on potential revenue and clients, customers. And so you want to make sure that you understand what it is that's preventing them from doing the things they're trying to accomplish. What is preventing them from reaching the goals that they have? Once you've identified the goals that they're trying to accomplish and the challenges that they have in accomplishing those goals, then you want to describe to them how you'll help them with each. So this is pretty simple. And again, this is different than, a lot of folks, when they're asked interview questions, what they kind of end up doing, whether they realize it or not, is reciting their CV. And so they might say, I went to medical school at this place, and I did my residency at this place, and, I took this course, and I did these other things, and I did this, mission abroad and things like that. And those are really useful, but they already know those things most of the time. They have your CV, and they have a lot of other CVs that probably look pretty similar. You don't want to compete as just, a piece of paper and a stack of papers. You want to compete as a person who can help them to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish and overcome the challenges they're facing. And so you want to describe to them, I can help you do this thing that you're trying to do because I have this background that will help me do that. And then what you do is, when you first start this process, finding goals and challenges can be pretty challenging because you might not know who's going to interview you even. And so you might look at, their website, or you might, if they have some marketing material out there, or even their advertisements in that geography where they are, they might have information that's useful for you to figure out, what are they trying to accomplish? What do they say is their mission statement? What community are they trying to serve, and that kind of thing. But then as you talk to people within the institution, the organization, then you can learn more about what their actual goals and challenges are, as I said, macro to micro. So you can actually figure out, what is the director of the group that you're going to join struggling with. And as you move through your interviews, gathering that intel can be really useful. The way that you can do this, by the way, is pretty much every interview will end with a moment where the person interviewing you will say, hey, I've been talking for 45 minutes. I've been peppering you with questions. We have a few minutes left here before we wrap up. Do you have any questions for me before we go? And you can just ask them outright. Hey, that's actually a great question for me. I was wondering, what are you trying to accomplish right now on your team? What is it that you see as the important things that you need to accomplish as a team, as part of your mission, whatever it is? And then they will tell you. Same thing with challenges. Hey, what's keeping you up at night? What's really difficult right now in this group? And they'll tell you again, oh yeah, we've really been struggling with this thing or this technology problem that we're having, or we're really struggling to find people who are comfortable doing this thing. And that can be really, really valuable information. And just asking those questions themselves, again, demonstrates that you are different than most other people. Most other people are not going to ask those questions. The really nice thing about this tactic is the person who's interviewing you is interviewing you away from their normal job. They're usually doing other things. They interrupted those things to interview you. I understand that when you're being interviewed, it can feel like a really big deal. You've been planning for this or prepping for this for weeks or months. For them, they were doing something else that was their day job. They got, a calendar reminder that they have an interview coming up with a candidate in 10 minutes. They started scrambling, tried to find a copy of your CV, maybe printed it out so they'd have it in front of them. And they're now distracted by the interview, from the things they're trying to accomplish, from the challenges that they're facing. And when they're finished interviewing, they're going to go back to trying to accomplish those things and overcome those challenges. And even while they're interviewing you, they might be thinking about those things. They're probably thinking, as soon as this interview is over, I'm going to go try this thing that might solve this problem that I have. And so when you ask them to talk about those things, they're eager to talk about them because they were thinking about it before your interview. They're going to think about it after your interview, and they might be thinking about it during your interview. And so you're asking them, hey, tell me what's on your mind right now, which can be really helpful. So once they've told you what their goals and challenges are, and you go to the next interview, you'll have that information available to give even better answers when you're describing how you're going to help them accomplish their goals and overcome their challenges. Another thing that I'll say as I wrap up here is that you need to have a minimum acceptable salary in mind. Going back to the salary expectations question, you told them that you don't really have a number in mind and you look forward to hearing what they think. And that's true, but you also do have a number in mind, which is, how much do I need to make at this particular institution in order to make this work for me? This could be a different number per place. It won't necessarily be the same number across the board, but it's important that you have this number in mind, because once they make you that offer, if you have this number in mind before, remember this is all before you negotiate. If you have this number in mind before you negotiate, then you can objectively evaluate the offer they made you, at least on the dimensions that you have included in your minimum acceptable salary, and determine, is this a good offer? Is it a bad offer? Is it pretty close to what I need? Which will inform your negotiation strategy. It'll inform how aggressive you need to be, what things you might ask for. For example, if they're way above your minimum acceptable salary, but something about your shift schedule doesn't look great, maybe you'll just focus on that and try to get your quality of life up because you're already good on comp. And so it's really important to know what your minimum is before they make the offer, because it informs your strategy once you get the offer, once you have evaluated it. So in order to do that, here are some things that you might think about that will help you to determine your minimum acceptable salary for each contract that you're going to consider. The first one is salary reference points. So in your specialty, in this region, at this type of organization, what are physicians making? That's something that's really important to know. You can get this sometimes online. You can ask colleagues, you can ask other attendings that you might know, and just see if you can get a general idea of like, what should I even be expecting here? And then you also have cost of living considerations. So the geography that you're going to, where you're going to be living, how much does it cost to live there? And can you afford to live there well on the salary, the compensation that they're offering you? And so, a lower cost of living place, maybe your minimum is a little bit lower. A very high cost of living place, you might need a higher minimum acceptable salary so that you can afford to actually live there and work. And then, of course, if you have other opportunities, those will factor in as well. If you have an opportunity that you're really, really excited about, it's exactly what you want, you've been looking for this opportunity for years, then any other opportunity that comes along is going to need to offer more salary probably to compete with that opportunity that you're really in love with. And so you want to make sure that you're kind of adjusting up or down based on the other opportunities you have. The flip side of that could be, you've got two other opportunities. They're both ones that you're really not interested in. You just kind of applied to them on a flyer and you're not really expecting to end up there, really hoping to, but that's what you have in hand right now. Now you have another better opportunity. Maybe your minimum acceptable salary for that better opportunity is a little bit lower because it's either that or go work for one of those other opportunities that you're considering. And so you might move your minimum up or down just based on how many other options do you have. And then, of course, risk. There can be a lot of risk involved with different types of physician contracts. There might be a non-compete. Again, I mentioned, are you on the hook for malpractice or not, and that kind of thing. And so you want to account for that, indirectly, because it can affect the quality of that opportunity and sort of how difficult it is to work there, but directly because it could cost you money out of pocket, for example, to buy malpractice insurance or other types of insurance, or it may make it difficult for you to move. If you decide you don't want to work there after a while, then you might be taking a risk that it's difficult for you to get a job that doesn't require you to move. So consider the types of risks that might be involved in the contract that they're offering you. And then just your overall feel. I think it's fine to turn this into sort of a subjective thing. You want to objectively evaluate your offer relative to your minimum acceptable salary, but there might be just some things that feel off about a thing, or something that feels really exciting about it. And so you might adapt your minimum acceptable salary to be higher or lower, depending on what those factors look like. So it's important that you pick your number and stick to it. Again, this is per opportunity. It's not a universal number. You may have a universal number, but for each opportunity, this number is probably going to vary based on what's in the contract, based on a bunch of other things that might be available to you to evaluate that offer. So pick your minimum acceptable salary and stick to it so that when you begin to negotiate, I need to get to this number or I can't make this opportunity work. It will make it much easier for you to negotiate confidently and without being concerned about leaving money on the table or losing an opportunity that maybe you don't even really care about anyway. So having that objective bar set before they make the offer allows you to objectively evaluate the offer, determine the strategy that's best appropriate to pursue negotiating that offer to get the best possible result. So this has been Physician Contract Negotiation. I'm Josh Duty. You can find me at fearlesssalarynegotiation.com. I hope this has been helpful for you.